The wagon lurched over another rut, and Eliza Rowan's spine protested with a sharp jolt that made her teeth click together. She'd been traveling for 3 days across Wyoming territory, first by train, then by stage, and finally in this rickety excuse for transport, driven by a man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words since picking her up in town. Not that she minded the silence. She'd had enough of talk, enough of pity, enough of people in Philadelphia whispering behind their hands about poor Eliza and such a shame about Thomas. Thomas was 2 years dead. The typhoid had taken him in 4 days flat, and the debts he'd left behind had taken everything else in the months that followed. The house, the furniture, her mother's china, everything except the cast iron skillet she'd wrapped in her spare dress, and the spine that had kept her upright through it all. She was 31 years old, no children, no family, no prospects, just a letter from a man named Caleb Vance offering room, board, and $40 a month to cook and keep house for his family on a cattle ranch at the edge of nowhere. $40 was more than she'd make in 3 months doing laundry in the city, and nowhere sounded just about perfect. The driver, Morrison, she thought his name was, cleared his throat. That's the Vance place. Eliza leaned forward, squinting against the late afternoon sun. The ranch sprawled across a valley cupped between low hills, the land rolling away in shades of brown and gold under a sky so big it made her feel small. She could see the main house, a 2-story structure that had probably been handsome once, its white paint now weathered to gray. A barn, larger than the house. Corrals. Outbuildings scattered like dice someone had tossed and forgotten, and not a single person in sight. "Looks quiet," she said. Morrison made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Quiet. Yeah, that's one word for it. What's another?" He didn't answer, just clucked to the horses and guided them down the rutted track that served as a road. As they drew closer, Eliza noticed things. The fence rails that needed mending, the weeds growing up around the porch steps, a broken shutter hanging at an angle from an upstairs window, not falling apart exactly. More like paused. Like someone had stopped caring about the details that made a place a home and started caring only about the parts that kept it standing. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Morrison set the brake and climbed down, but he didn't offer to help her. She gathered her skirts and descended on her own, her boots raising small puffs of dust when they hit the ground. The air smelled of hay and horses and something else, something like neglect, if neglect had a smell. The front door opened. 6 children filed out onto the porch like soldiers forming ranks. 6. The letter had mentioned children, but somehow Eliza hadn't quite pictured. 6. They ranged from maybe 14 down to what looked like 4 or 5. 3 boys and 3 girls, all of them dressed clean but plain, their faces scrubbed and their hair combed. And every single one of them was staring at her like she was a curiosity in a traveling show. Mrs. Rowan, the oldest, a girl with dark hair pulled back severe enough to hurt and eyes that looked about 40 years old, stepped forward. "I'm Margaret. Margaret Vance. Pa said to expect you." "It's nice to meet you, Margaret." Eliza tried a smile. "And please, call me Eliza." Margaret didn't smile back. "Pa's in the barn. He said to get you settled. Your room's upstairs, last door on the right. Supper's at 6. We eat what we're served and we don't waste. Breakfast is at 5:30, washing's on Monday, ironing's on Tuesday, baking's on Saturday. Church is—" She paused. "We don't go to church anymore." Eliza blinked. The girl had delivered this speech in the same tone someone might use to recite multiplication tables. No warmth, no welcome, just facts. "That's very thorough. Thank you." "Daniel, Matthew, get Mrs. Rowan's trunk." 2 boys, maybe 12 and 10, jumped to obey. They hauled Eliza's battered trunk from the wagon with the efficiency of practice, barely grunting under its weight. Morrison tipped his hat. "Good luck, ma'am," he said, and there was something in his voice that made it sound less like a pleasantry and more like a warning. Then he was climbing back onto the wagon, turning the horses, leaving her standing in the dust with 6 children who looked at her like she was already a disappointment they'd learned to expect. "Well," Eliza said into the silence, "I suppose I should see my room." Margaret nodded. "This way." The inside of the house was clean. That was the first thing Eliza noticed. The floors were swept. The furniture was dusted. The windows, what she could see of them, were washed. Everything was in its place, organized and orderly, and absolutely lifeless. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, no pictures on the walls except for a few faded rectangles where pictures had clearly hung once and been removed. The house felt like a museum, or a mausoleum, a place where people existed but didn't live. Margaret led her up the stairs, the other children trailing behind in silence. The steps didn't creak. The floorboards didn't groan. It was like the house itself was holding its breath. "This is you." The room was small but adequate. A bed with a thin mattress and thinner blankets, a washstand with a chipped basin, a hook on the wall for hanging clothes, a single window that looked out over the yard toward the barn, and nothing else. "Thank you, Zay," Eliza said. "It's fine." Margaret nodded. "Supper at 6, she repeated. Then she turned and left, herding the younger children ahead of her like a sheepdog with a flock. Eliza stood in the empty room and listened to their footsteps fade away down the stairs. Then she walked to the window and looked out. The barn door was open. She could see movement inside, a shadow that might have been a man, might have been her new employer. Caleb Vance, who had offered her $40 a month and hadn't even bothered to come out and meet her. She'd worked for difficult men before, men who thought a woman's place was to be invisible until needed, men who paid wages and expected miracles. She could handle difficult. What worried her was the silence. Not the absence of noise, there was plenty of that in any ranch, but the absence of life, energy, the mess and chaos that came with children. She'd passed through the kitchen on the way upstairs, and it had been immaculate, spotless, like no one actually cooked there. How did you feed 6 children without making a mess? The answer, she suspected, was that you didn't really feed them. You just kept them alive. Eliza unpacked her trunk. It didn't take long. She didn't have much. 2 dresses besides the one she was wearing, undergarments, a nightgown, her mother's Bible, which she hadn't opened since Thomas died but couldn't quite bring herself to leave behind, the skillet, still wrapped in her spare dress. She pulled it out and held it, feeling the familiar weight. Cast iron, seasoned smooth by years of use. Her mother had given it to her the day she married Thomas, and her mother's mother had given it to her mother before that. It was probably worth more than everything else she owned combined. A knock at the door made her turn. "Yes?" A small face peeked around the door frame. One of the younger girls, maybe 7 or 8, with brown braids and eyes too big for her face. "I'm Lily," the girl whispered. "Mama had a skillet like that." Eliza's chest tightened. "Did she?" Lily nodded. "She made pancakes on Sundays before she—" The girl's voice trailed off. "Before she what, honey?" But Lily had already disappeared, her footsteps pattering away down the hall. Eliza set the skillet on the washstand and sat down on the bed. The mattress was harder than it looked. Through the window, she could still see the barn. Still see that shadow moving inside. A man who hired a housekeeper but wouldn't come out to meet her. Children who moved like ghosts through a house that should have been loud with life. A dead woman's skillet that still made a 7-year-old's eyes light up. What the hell had she gotten herself into? At 5:55, Eliza made her way downstairs. She'd changed into her other dress, dark gray, practical, with an apron she'd sewn herself. Her hair was pinned up tight. She looked like what she was, a woman ready to work. The kitchen was exactly as she'd seen it before, clean, organized, and completely wrong. The stove was cold. There was no smell of cooking, no pots on the fire, no bread in the oven. Margaret stood at the counter, slicing bread from a loaf that looked 3 days old. The other children were setting the table with mechanical precision, plates, forks, cups. No one spoke. No one looked at each other. "Can I help, Pa?" Eliza asked. Margaret didn't look up. "We've got it." "What are we having?" "Bread, cheese, milk?" Eliza glanced at the cold stove, at the pantry, which she could see was well stocked through the open door, at the children who were moving through their tasks like soldiers following orders. That's supper? It's what we eat. Every night. Most nights. Sometimes we have soup. Eliza felt something hot and tight building in her chest. These children, 6 of them, some still growing, were being fed like prisoners. Like keeping them alive was the goal, and anything beyond that was unnecessary luxury. "Where's your father?" she asked, keeping her voice level. "In the barn." "Does he eat with you?" "No, ma'am. He eats later." "I see." Eliza untied her apron and hung it on a hook. "Well, I'm going to have a word with Mr. Vance about supper arrangements." Margaret's head snapped up. "You can't." "I most certainly can. I was hired to cook, and I can't cook if no one tells me what's expected." She smiled, but there was steel in it. "I'll be right back." She walked out before Margaret could protest. The evening air was cooling fast, the way it did in high country. Eliza crossed the yard to the barn, her boots crunching on scattered hay. The door was wide open, but somehow it still felt like trespassing. "Mr. Vance?" No answer. But she could hear something, the rhythmic scrape of metal on wood. She stepped inside. The barn was bigger than it looked from outside, with stalls lining both sides and a loft overhead stuffed with hay. Lanterns hung from posts, casting pools of warm light, and at the far end, a man stood with his back to her, working a plane across a length of wood. He was tall. That was the first thing she noticed. Broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and sleeves rolled up over forearms corded with muscle. He worked with the kind of focus that shut out everything else, the plane sending up curls of wood shavings that fell to the floor like snow. "Mr. Vance," she said again, louder. The scraping stopped. The man set down the plane, but he didn't turn around. "You're here." His voice was low, rough from disuse. "I am. Eliza Rowan." "Your room acceptable?" "It's fine." "Good." Silence. He picked up the plane again. Eliza felt her temper stir. "Mr. Vance, I need to discuss the children's meals. Margaret handles it. Margaret is 14 years old. She's capable." "I'm sure she is, but I was hired to cook, and right now your children are eating bread and cheese for supper." The plane paused. "They're fed." "Fed isn't the same as nourished." Now he turned, and Eliza got her first real look at Caleb Vance. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 35, though grief had carved lines around his eyes and mouth that made him look older. Dark eyes that didn't quite meet hers, a jaw that could have been handsome if it wasn't clenched so tight. He looked like a man who'd learned to carry weight he couldn't put down and had forgotten there was any other way to stand. "Mrs. Rowan," he said, and there was warning in it. "I appreciate you coming all this way. You'll be paid fair, you'll be treated respectful. But how I run my household is my business. Your household is now partly my business, since I'm part of it." His eyes narrowed. "You've been here 2 hours. Long enough to see that those children need more than bread and cheese. They're alive, they're healthy. That's what matters." "Is it?" Eliza took a step closer. "Because from where I stand, they look like they're surviving, not living. There's a difference." Something flickered across his face. Anger, maybe, or pain, so old it had scarred over. "You don't know anything about us." "You're right, I don't. But I know about children, and I know about grief, and I know that feeding them like prisoners isn't protecting them from anything except the memory of better days." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb Vance stared at her, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. "My wife," he said finally, "died 18 months ago. Fever took her in 3 days. The children—" He stopped, started again. "Margaret tries. She keeps things running, but she's just a girl." "I know. That's why you hired me. I hired you to take the burden off her shoulders, not to come in here and tell me I've been doing everything wrong." "I didn't say wrong. I said incomplete." He turned away, bracing his hands on the workbench. "What do you want from me, Mrs. Rowan?" "Permission to do my job, which is cooking proper meals for your family." "Fine. Cook. And I'll need to know what the children like, what they don't like. If anyone has sensitivities or preferences, they'll eat what's put in front of them." Eliza bit back a sigh. "Mr. Vance, is there anything else?" It was a dismissal, clear as day. She could push, part of her wanted to, but she'd learned long ago that you didn't win wars in a single battle. Sometimes you had to retreat, regroup, and come at it from another angle. No, she said. Nothing else. For now. She turned to go, then paused at the door. Mr. Vance? Margaret said you don't eat with the family. His shoulders stiffened. I eat later. Why? That's not your concern. Everything about this family is my concern now. That's what you're paying me for. When he didn't answer, she walked out. Quote, the children were seated at the table when she returned, 6 pairs of eyes watching her warily. Margaret's face was carefully blank, but Eliza could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. Well, Eliza said brightly, that's settled. Starting tomorrow, we'll have proper suppers. Tonight, though, I think we can do better than bread and cheese. She moved to the pantry and started pulling things out. Eggs, butter, a ham she found hanging in the cold room, potatoes, an onion. Mrs. Rowan, Margaret started. You can call me Eliza, and I could use some help. Do you know how to dice an onion? Margaret blinked. Yes. Good. You're with me. Lily, is that right? Lily, can you fetch me that big pot from the shelf? Daniel, I'll need firewood for the stove. For a moment, no one moved. They just stared at her like she'd started speaking a foreign language. Then the youngest boy, he couldn't have been more than 5, slid off his chair and walked over to her. He had dark curls and a gap where his front teeth should have been. I'm Ben, he said. I can get the pot. Lily's too little. Lily's eyes flashed. Am not. R2. Both of you can get it together, Eliza said firmly. Teamwork. Daniel, that wood? And just like that, the kitchen came alive. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't perfect. Margaret handled the knife like she was afraid it might bite her. Daniel brought in enough wood to heat the house for a week. The 2 middle children, Matthew and another girl named Ruth, she learned, mostly got in the way trying to help. But there was noise, movement, the clatter of pots and the sizzle of butter in a pan, and the smell of onions cooking, and someone asking a question, and someone else laughing when Ben tried to crack an egg and got shell everywhere. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was, Eliza thought as she stirred the pot of scrambled eggs and ham and potatoes that wouldn't win any cooking prizes, but would fill hungry bellies alive. Set the table again, she told Ruth. We'll need serving spoons. And Margaret, can you slice more bread? This is going to need something to soak up the... She stopped. Because through the window over the sink, she could see the barn, could see a figure standing in the doorway, half in shadow, watching the house, watching the light spilling from the kitchen windows. Watching, she realized, his children. Their eyes met across the distance. Even through the glass, she could see the expression on Caleb Vance's face, something raw and painful and almost like hunger. Then he turned and disappeared back into the darkness. Eliza stirred the pot and said nothing. They ate. All 6 children gathered around the table, spooning hot food onto their plates with an eagerness they tried to hide and mostly failed. No one spoke much. They were too focused on eating, but there were small sounds, satisfied sighs, the scrape of forks, Ben asking for seconds and then thirds. This is good, Matthew said quietly. He was the 10-year-old with his father's dark eyes. Really good. Thank you. Mama used to make eggs like this, Lily added. Then her face fell, like she'd said something wrong. Margaret shot her a look. Lily, it's all right, Eliza said gently. It's all right to remember good things. Lily's eyes filled with tears. I miss her. Of course you do. Pa says we shouldn't talk about her, says it makes it harder. Eliza felt that hot, tight feeling in her chest again. What do you think? Lily considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could manage. I think it's hard either way, but talking about her makes me feel less alone. Ruth reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. Margaret looked down at her plate, and Eliza understood with sudden clarity what was happening in this house. Caleb Vance wasn't just grieving his wife, he was trying to bury her, trying to pack away every memory, every reminder, thinking that if he could just stop feeling, stop remembering, it would hurt less. And he'd taught his children to do the same, to survive by shutting down, shutting off, shutting out anything that might crack the armor they'd built around their hearts. It was killing them, slowly, quietly. But it was killing them all the same. Your mama, Eliza said carefully, must have been someone very special to have raised such good children. 6 pairs of eyes looked at her with something like hope. She was beautiful, Ruth said softly, and she sang. All the time she sang. She made the best cinnamon rolls, Daniel added. We had them every Sunday. She tucked us in every night, Lily said, even when we got too old for it. She wasn't scared of anything, Matthew said. Remember when that bear came through? She just walked out on the porch with the rifle and stared it down until it left. Margaret didn't say anything, but her hands were clenched so tight around her fork that her knuckles had gone white. She sounds, Eliza said, like someone worth remembering. They finished the meal in a different kind of silence, not the dead quiet of before, but something softer, thoughtful, like they were all holding the same memory and finding comfort in its weight. When the dishes were cleared and washed, all 6 children helping without being asked, Margaret lingered while the younger ones headed upstairs to bed. Mrs. Rowan, Eliza, I need to say something. All right. The girl took a breath. When Mama died, I thought I had to be her, for them, for Pa. I thought if I could just keep everything running, keep everything clean and organized and quiet, then maybe it wouldn't hurt so much. But it does. It hurts all the time, and I don't know how to fix it. Eliza reached out and took Margaret's hand. It was rough from work, calloused in a way no 14-year-old's hand should be. You can't fix grief, she said quietly. You can only walk through it, and you don't have to walk alone. Margaret's composure cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough for Eliza to see the scared, exhausted, heartbroken child underneath the armor she'd built. Then she straightened, wiped her eyes, and nodded. I should get to bed. Morning comes early. It does. But before she left, Margaret turned back. Thank you, for supper, for tonight. You're welcome. Eliza stood alone in the kitchen and listened to the house settle into sleep. Upstairs, she could hear the creak of beds and the murmur of voices, the younger children talking, probably, about something children talked about when the adults weren't listening. Through the window, the barn was dark now, but she knew somehow that Caleb Vance was still out there, still hiding, still trying to outrun the grief that had its teeth in him and wouldn't let go. She'd been hired to cook and clean. But what this family needed wasn't a housekeeper. They needed someone willing to fight for them, to push back against the silence and the grief and the slow death of living without actually being alive. They needed someone stubborn enough to stay. Eliza Rowan picked up her mother's skillet, ran her fingers over the smooth iron, and made a decision. She wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Maybe not ever. And tomorrow, she was making cinnamon rolls. The kitchen smelled like heaven at 4:30 in the morning. Eliza had been up since 3, her hands working dough the way her mother had taught her, kneading until the gluten developed just right, letting it rise in the warmth near the stove, rolling it out thin and spreading it with butter and cinnamon and brown sugar until her fingers were sticky and sweet. The house was still dark, still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Expectant, maybe, like something was about to break open. She'd just slid the second pan into the oven when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Margaret appeared in the doorway, already dressed, her hair in that same severe braid. She stopped when she saw Eliza, her nose twitching at the smell filling the kitchen. "You're up early," Margaret said. "So are you." "I always get up at 4:30. There's—" She paused, sniffing the air again. "What is that?" "Cinnamon rolls. Daniel said they were your mother's specialty. Thought I'd give them a try." Margaret went very still. "You shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" "Because—" The girl's voice cracked, just barely. "Because Pa won't like it. Your Pa doesn't have to eat them if he doesn't want to." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron. "But the rest of you deserve something good for breakfast. Doesn't have to mean anything more than that." Margaret stood there, caught between what she'd been taught, don't make waves, don't remember, don't feel, and what she clearly wanted, which was to let herself have this one small thing. Finally, she took a step closer. Do they smell right? Come see for yourself. Margaret crossed to the oven and peered through the glass door. The rolls were rising, golden and perfect, the sugar bubbling at the edges. Her reflection in the glass looked younger than 14, looked, for just a moment, like a child. She always made them on Sunday mornings, Margaret said quietly. After we'd get back from, well, before. She'd have them waiting, still warm, and we'd eat them at the table and get sticky fingers, and she'd laugh and say we were hopeless. Sounds like a good memory. It was. Margaret straightened up and the armor slid back into place. I should get started on the morning chores. I'll help once these are out. You don't have to. I know, but I'm going to anyway. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across her face. Then she nodded and disappeared out the back door toward the chicken coop. By the time the rolls came out, perfect, if Eliza said so herself, the other children were starting to drift downstairs, drawn by the smell like moths to lamplight. Ben came first, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair sticking up in all directions. What's that? He asked, climbing onto a chair to get a better look. Trouble, Eliza said, but she was smiling. The kind you eat with your fingers. Can I have one? After breakfast. These are for the table. But they smell so good, which is exactly why you can wait 5 more minutes. By the time Margaret came back in with a basket of eggs, all 6 children were gathered around the kitchen table, trying very hard not to stare at the cooling pans of cinnamon rolls while Eliza scrambled eggs and fried bacon. The younger ones kept shooting hopeful glances at the rolls. The older ones, Matthew, Ruth, Margaret, looked torn between wanting and being afraid to want. Everyone wash up, Eliza said. Breakfast in 2 minutes. They scattered to comply, and when they returned, she had everything laid out. Eggs, bacon, biscuits left over from yesterday, and in the center of the table, like a centerpiece, the pan of cinnamon rolls. No one moved. Well, Eliza said, dig in. Pa isn't here, Ruth said hesitantly. Your father eats in the barn. He told me so himself. Eliza sat down. Now, I believe there's a rule in this house about not wasting food, so I suggest we get started before everything gets cold. It was Lily who broke first. She reached out, pulled a roll from the pan, the sugar stretching in golden strings, and took a bite. Her eyes went wide. It tastes like Mama's, she breathed. And just like that, the dam broke. They ate like they'd been starving. Not just for the food, though the rolls disappeared faster than snow in July, but for the permission to enjoy something, to take pleasure in a meal, to sit together at a table and be more than just bodies going through motions. Daniel got sugar on his chin. Ben licked his fingers. Even Margaret, after a long hesitation, took a roll and ate it slowly, her eyes closed, and Eliza could see her remembering. These are perfect, Matthew said, his voice thick. They're exactly right. Your mother taught you well, Eliza said to Margaret. I didn't make these. No, but you kept her recipe alive. That takes something. Margaret looked down at her plate, blinking hard. They finished breakfast, and Eliza sent the older children out to their chores, while she cleaned up with Lily and Ruth helping. The girls chattered as they worked, Lily about a bird's nest she'd found, Ruth about a story she was reading, and Eliza let the sound of their voices wash over her. This was what a kitchen should sound like. Alive. Full. She was elbow-deep in dishwater when she heard boots on the porch. The back door opened, and Caleb Vance stepped inside. He stopped when he saw her. His eyes went to the empty pan on the counter, then to the lingering smell of cinnamon in the air. His jaw tightened. Mr. Vance, Eliza said evenly. Good morning. What did you do? I made breakfast. You made... He stopped himself, visibly wrestling with something. I told you, the children eat what they're given. And I gave them cinnamon rolls, along with eggs and bacon and biscuits, a proper breakfast. You had no right. I had every right. You hired me to cook. I didn't hire you to... He gestured helplessly at the kitchen. at the evidence of the meal, at the violation of the unspoken rule that had governed this house for 18 months. To do this, to feed your children something they'd enjoy, to bring her back. The words exploded out of him, raw and ragged. You don't get to come in here and cook her recipes and make them remember and pretend like... He stopped, turned away. His shoulders were heaving. Eliza dried her hands carefully. Lily and Ruth had gone very quiet, very still. She jerked her head toward the door and they fled, leaving her alone with a man who looked like he might shatter. "Mr. Vance," she said quietly, "I'm not trying to replace your wife." "Then what are you trying to do?" "Help your family heal." He laughed, bitter and broken. "You've been here one day. Long enough to see that the way things are isn't working." "It's working fine." "Is it?" She took a step closer. "Your children are terrified to be happy. Margaret's carrying a burden that's crushing her. The little ones barely remember what it's like to laugh. And you..." She paused. "You're hiding in a barn, eating alone, trying to pretend that if you just don't feel anything, it won't hurt anymore. You don't know what you're talking about. I know about loss. My husband died 2 years ago. Typhoid took him so fast I barely had time to say goodbye. And afterward, I wanted to do exactly what you're doing. Pack it all away. Stop feeling. Stop remembering. But you know what I learned?" He didn't answer, but he was listening. "The grief doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It just turns into something else. Something worse. It turns into this hollow place inside you that nothing can fill because you won't let anything in." She moved closer still. "Your wife is gone. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But your children are still here, and they need you to be here too. Not hiding, not running. Here." Caleb's hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. "I don't know how." "Then learn, one day at a time, one meal at a time. Start by eating breakfast with your family." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I sit at that table, if I let myself remember what it was like when she was here, I'll fall apart. And if I fall apart, what happens to them?" Eliza's throat tightened. "What happens to them if you don't?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside, she could hear the children's voices. Daniel calling to Matthew about something, Ben laughing. Life continuing whether they were ready for it or not. Caleb straightened slowly, turned to face her. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Tomorrow," he said hoarsely. I'll try. Tomorrow." It wasn't much, but it was something. "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed. He left without another word, but this time he didn't go to the barn. She watched through the window as he walked toward the corral where Daniel and Matthew were mending fence, and when he reached them, he picked up a hammer and started working alongside them. Small steps. That's all healing ever was. The days that followed developed a rhythm. Eliza rose before dawn to start breakfast, real breakfast, with eggs and bacon and potatoes and bread fresh from the oven. The children gathered at the table, and slowly, tentatively, they started to relax, started to talk during meals instead of eating in silence, started to ask for seconds without looking guilty about it. Caleb kept his word. He showed up for breakfast the second morning, sitting at the head of the table like a man walking to his own execution. He barely spoke, barely ate, but he was there. And each day after that, it got a little easier, a little less painful. Eliza learned the rhythms of the ranch, the patterns of their days. Margaret handled the chickens and the dairy work. Daniel and Matthew took care of the livestock. Ruth helped with the younger children. Lily had a gift for finding things, lost tools, missing buttons, eggs the hens hid in strange places. Ben was too small for serious work, but he followed his father everywhere, absorbing lessons in the way children did. And Caleb. Caleb worked. From sunup to sundown, he worked, fixing fences, breaking horses, mending tack, always moving, always busy, like if he stopped for even a moment, something terrible might catch up to him. But he was eating with them now. That was something. On the fourth day, Eliza was in the garden, or what passed for a garden since it had clearly been neglected for months, when Ruth came running up, out of breath. "Eliza, come quick! What's wrong?" "It's Matthew. He fell from the hayloft. Pa sent me to get you." Eliza didn't ask questions, just grabbed her skirts and ran. They'd laid Matthew out on the barn floor, and her heart lurched when she saw him, pale, conscious but clearly in pain, cradling his left arm against his chest. Caleb knelt beside him, his face tight with worry. "Let me see," Eliza said, dropping to her knees. "I'm fine," Matthew gasped. "Just hurts a bit." "A bit more than a bit, I'd wager." She gently probed his arm, feeling for breaks. Matthew hissed in pain when she touched his wrist. "Can you move your fingers?" He could, barely. Eliza sat back on her heels. "It's not broken. Badly sprained, maybe a small fracture. We'll need to splint it and keep it immobilized." She looked at Caleb. "Do you have any thin boards? And cloth for wrapping?" "I'll get them." He stood, hesitated. "Will he be all right?" "He'll be fine, but he'll need to keep still for a few weeks while it heals." Caleb nodded and disappeared into the depths of the barn. Eliza stayed with Matthew, talking to him in a low, calm voice, keeping him focused on her instead of the pain. "What happened?" she asked. "I was stacking hay. Missed my footing. Stupid. Accidents happen. Pa's going to be angry." "Your father's worried, not angry. There's a difference." Matthew looked at her with eyes too old for 10. "He doesn't like it when we get hurt. Reminds him of when Mama got sick, how fast it happened." Eliza's chest tightened. "I understand." "Do you?" "Understand, I mean." "I lost someone too. I know how it feels to be afraid of losing anyone else." "How did you stop being afraid?" She didn't have a good answer for that, because the truth was she hadn't stopped. The fear was still there, lurking in the background of everything. You just learned to live with it. "I think," she said carefully, "you don't stop being afraid. You just decide that living is worth the risk." Caleb returned with boards and strips of clean cloth. Together they splinted Matthew's wrist, wrapping it snug but not too tight. The boy bore it stoically, only flinching once or twice. "There, bussies," Eliza said when they finished. "Keep this on for at least 3 weeks. No climbing, no heavy lifting. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Now let's get you inside." Caleb lifted Matthew like he weighed nothing, cradling his son against his chest with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. Eliza followed them to the house, where they settled Matthew on the sofa in the front room, a room she'd noticed the family never used. "I'll make some willow bark tea for the pain," she said, but before she could leave, Caleb caught her arm. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for knowing what to do. I've patched up my share of injuries. Still, thank you." Their eyes met, and for just a moment, Eliza saw past the walls he'd built, saw the fear underneath, the terror of something happening to one of his children, of losing anyone else, of the world taking more than he could afford to give. "He's going to be fine," she said gently. Caleb nodded and released her arm, but something had shifted, some small crack in the foundation of his isolation. That evening, after Matthew was dosed with tea and resting comfortably, Eliza found Caleb in the barn again. He was standing in front of the workbench, not working, just standing, staring at nothing. "Mr. Vance," he turned. "Is Matthew sleeping? The tea helped." "Good. That's good." She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. "You're afraid," she said. It wasn't a question. "Every day." The admission seemed pulled from somewhere deep. "Every single day, I'm afraid, that one of them will get sick or hurt, or that I'll fail them somehow and they'll—" He stopped. "They'll what?" "End up like me. Broken." Eliza felt something twist in her chest. "You're not broken." "I can't even sit through a meal without feeling like I'm drowning." "But you're doing it anyway. That's not broken. That's brave." He laughed, harsh and short. "Brave. Right. It is. Showing up even when it hurts. That's the definition of courage. My wife was brave. She faced down bears and blizzards and didn't flinch. I can't even face down breakfast. Different kinds of courage for different kinds of battles. Eliza took another step closer. Your wife fought bears. You're fighting grief. Both take strength. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, she would have liked you, Sarah. She would have approved of what you're doing for the children. It was the first time he'd said his wife's name in front of Eliza. The weight of it hung in the air between them. Tell me about her, Eliza said softly. Why? Because I think you need to. And because I want to know about the woman who raised those children. He looked at her like she'd suggested something dangerous. Maybe she had. But then, slowly, he started talking. Sarah had been a rancher's daughter, born to this life. She could ride before she could walk, shoot before she could write her name. She'd been fearless and fierce and had laughed at Caleb when he'd tried to court her with flowers and poetry, telling him if he wanted to win her over, he'd better bring something useful. So he'd brought her a new saddle, hand-tooled, and she'd married him 3 months later. They'd built the ranch together, side by side. Every fence post, every building, every decision. She'd worked as hard as any man, harder even, and she'd filled the house with warmth and laughter and the kind of love that made hard work feel worthwhile. And then, in the space of 3 days, she was gone. Caleb's voice was rough by the time he finished, his eyes bright with unshed tears. The morning she died, he said, I was out checking the north pasture. When I came back, Margaret met me at the door. I knew before she said anything. I could see it in her face. I ran upstairs, but Sarah was already gone. And I never got to say goodbye, never got to tell her. He stopped, jaw working. There were things I should have said. I'm sure she knew. You can't know that. I know that a woman who was loved the way you describe being loved, she knew. Caleb turned away, bracing himself against the workbench. His shoulders shook, just once, and Eliza realized he was crying. Silently, privately, the way men did when they'd been taught that tears were weakness. She didn't touch him, didn't try to comfort him with empty words, just stood there, bearing witness to his grief, giving him the space to feel it without judgment. When he finally straightened, wiping his face with the back of his hand, he didn't look at her. I should check on Matthew, he said roughly. He's sleeping. Still, I should... He trailed off. You should let yourself grieve, Eliza said gently. Not just for her. For everything you lost when she died. The future you'd planned. The life you thought you'd have. All of it. And then what? Then you keep living, because that's what she would have wanted. For you and for those children. Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and Eliza saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? Someone quiet, obedient. Someone who'd keep to herself and not make waves. Sorry to disappoint. You're not a disappointment. He paused. You're unsettling. Unsettling? You see too much, say too much, make me feel too much. And that's a bad thing? I don't know yet. But there was something in his voice, something almost like hope, that made Eliza think maybe, just maybe, he was starting to believe it might not be. The following Sunday morning, Eliza was rolling out biscuits when Lily appeared at her elbow. Eliza, can I ask you something? Of course, honey. Why don't we go to church anymore? Eliza paused, her hands stilling on the dough. That's a question for your father. I asked him once. He said we just don't. When did you stop going? After Mama died, Pa said. He said there wasn't any point. Eliza felt anger flash through her, hot and quick. Not at Caleb. She understood his reasoning, understood the bitterness that came with loss. But at the waste of it. At denying these children one more piece of normalcy, one more connection to their community. Do you want to go? She asked carefully. Lily nodded. I miss it. I miss singing the hymns and seeing people, and she lowered her voice. And I think Mama would want us to go. Then you should tell your father that. He'll say no. Maybe, but maybe not. You won't know unless you ask. But Lily looked unconvinced, and Eliza couldn't blame her. Caleb Vance was not a man easily swayed. Still, the seed had been planted. That evening, after the children were in bed, Eliza found Caleb in the barn again. He was grooming one of the horses, his movements methodical and practiced. "The children miss church," she said without preamble, his hand stilled on the brush. "We don't go to church." "So I heard. Why not?" "That's my business." "It's their business, too. They're old enough to have opinions about their own lives. They're children. Children who lost their mother and then lost their community on top of it." Eliza crossed her arms. "I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But punishing your children for your own crisis of faith isn't fair." Caleb turned to face her, his eyes flashing. "I'm not punishing anyone." "Aren't you? You took away their church, their Sunday tradition, their connection to other families, all because you're too angry to set foot in that building. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Why should I?" "Because I'm asking." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, loud enough to echo in the barn's rafters. The horse snorted and shifted. Caleb stared at her, breathing hard. Then quietly, they prayed for her, the whole town. Prayed, and she died anyway. What's the point of prayer if it doesn't change anything? And there it was, the core of it. Not just grief, but betrayal. The feeling that he'd been promised something, hope, maybe, or fairness, and been handed ashes instead. "I don't have an answer for that," Eliza said softly. "I don't know why prayers go unanswered, why good people die and bad ones live, why the world breaks hearts without any reason we can see." She paused. "But I know that taking your children away from their community, from people who care about them, isn't protecting them, it's isolating them. And isolation doesn't heal grief, it just makes it heavier." Caleb looked away. "I can't go back there." "Then don't. But let them go. Let Margaret take them. They deserve that much." For a long moment, he didn't respond. Just stood there, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, fighting some internal battle Eliza couldn't see. Finally, "Fine. If they want to go, they can go." It wasn't enthusiastic, but it was permission. "Thank you," Eliza said. "Don't thank me. I'm only doing this because you won't stop pushing." "I'll take it." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it in his rough voice did something strange to her pulse. "Yes? Why do you care so much? About us?" She considered the question. The honest answer was complicated, that she recognized in this family her own grief reflected back, that she saw in Caleb's isolation her own worst instincts, that saving them might somehow mean saving herself. But what she said was simpler. "Because you matter, all of you, and someone needed to remind you of that." Then she walked out before he could respond, her heart beating faster than the conversation warranted, wondering when exactly this had stopped being just a job and started being something else entirely. The children went to church that Sunday, and the silence they left behind felt different than before. Not empty, exactly, just quiet in a way that let Eliza think while she worked, her hands busy with bread dough, while her mind wandered to places it probably shouldn't. She'd been at the ranch for 3 weeks now, 3 weeks of cooking and cleaning and slowly, carefully, coaxing this family back to something resembling life. The children were different already, louder, brighter, more willing to laugh. Even Margaret had started to soften around the edges, though she still carried herself like someone twice her age. And Caleb was still a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. He showed up for meals now, participated in conversation sometimes, looked his children in the eye when they spoke to him. But there was still distance there, still walls he wouldn't let anyone past. He worked himself half to death during the day and spent his evenings in the barn, alone, avoiding the house like it might swallow him whole if he stayed too long. Eliza punched down the dough harder than necessary, flour puffing up in a small cloud. It shouldn't bother her. His isolation, his grief, his stubborn refusal to fully engage with his own life. None of it was her business beyond what she'd been hired to fix. Except it did bother her. More than it should. She was sliding the bread pans into the oven when she heard hoofbeats outside. Too early for the children to be back, and the rhythm was wrong, urgent, fast. She wiped her hands and moved to the window just as a rider came barreling into the yard, a man she didn't recognize on a lathered horse. Caleb emerged from the barn before the rider had even dismounted. "Vance, the man shouted. "Fire on the ridge, spreading east toward the Patterson place." Eliza's blood went cold. She'd heard about prairie fires, about how they could sweep across dry grassland faster than a horse could run, consuming everything in their path. "How far?" Caleb's voice was sharp, controlled. "Maybe 5 miles from here. Wind's pushing it this way. We're gathering everyone who can help." Caleb nodded once. "Give me 2 minutes." The rider wheeled his horse and galloped off toward the next ranch. Caleb turned toward the house and stopped when he saw Eliza in the doorway. "Get the children," he said. "When they come back from town, keep them inside. If the wind shifts our direction, take them to the root cellar and stay there until I come back." "What are you going to do?" "Fight the fire. It's what we do out here." He was already moving toward the barn. "There's a shotgun in my room, loaded. You know how to use one?" "Yes." "Good. Probably won't need it, but just in case." He paused. "The animals, if it gets close, turn them loose. Better to lose stock than have them burn." Then he was gone, riding out with 3 of his ranch hands, leaving Eliza standing in a yard that suddenly felt too big and too exposed under a sky that was just starting to show a thin haze of smoke on the eastern horizon. She went back inside and tried to focus on normal tasks. Finished the bread, started a stew for supper, checked the root cellar to make sure it was clear, found the shotgun right where Caleb had said it would be, leaning in the corner of his bedroom, a room she'd never entered before. It was sparse. A bed, neatly made, a dresser, a chair. No decoration, no personality, nothing that marked it as belonging to anyone in particular, except for one thing, a photograph on the dresser, in a simple frame. Eliza picked it up without thinking. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that looked like it came easy. She stood next to a younger version of Caleb, his arm around her waist, both of them squinting into the sun. Behind them, Eliza could see the ranch house, newer then, its paint still white. This was Sarah, the woman who'd filled this house with warmth, the woman whose absence still echoed in every room. Eliza set the photograph down carefully and left, the shotgun in her hands, feeling like she'd trespassed on something private. The children returned an hour later, dusty and windblown from the ride, their voices carrying across the yard before Eliza even saw the wagon. Margaret was driving, the younger ones piled in back, all of them talking at once about who they'd seen and what they'd heard, and they stopped when they saw Eliza's face. "What's wrong?" Margaret asked, climbing down. "There's a fire. East of here. Your father went to help fight it." The color drained from Margaret's face. "How close?" 5 miles when the rider came. Maybe closer now. Margaret turned to look at the eastern horizon, where the smoke was thicker now, a dark smudge against the afternoon sky. The younger children climbed down from the wagon, their earlier excitement replaced by fear. "Is Pa going to be all right?" Lily asked in a small voice. "Your father knows what he's doing," Eliza said with more confidence than she felt. "Come inside, all of you. We'll have supper ready when he gets back." But supper came and went, and Caleb didn't return. The smoke grew thicker as the afternoon wore into evening. Eliza could smell it now, acrid and sharp, making her eyes water. The light took on a strange orange quality, the sun filtering through haze like it was shining through dirty glass. The children were restless, anxious. Even Ben, who was usually a chatterbox, sat quietly at the table, his eyes wide. Eliza kept them busy with small tasks. Ruth helped with dishes. Daniel brought in extra firewood. Matthew sat with his splinted arm and read to Lily and Ben from a book that had been his mother's. Margaret stood at the window, watching the horizon. "He'll come back," Eliza said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "You don't know that." "No, but I believe it. I believe Mama went out in the morning and was dead by evening. Things happen fast. The flatness in Margaret's voice was worse than tears would have been. Eliza put a hand on the girl's shoulder. Your father is not your mother, and a fire is not a fever. He's being careful. You can be careful and still die. Yes, you can, but you can also be careful and live, and standing here imagining the worst won't change which one happens. Margaret turned to look at her. How do you do it? How do you stay calm when you're scared? I don't stay calm. I just keep moving, keep working, keep doing the next thing that needs doing. Fear doesn't go away, but at least you're not frozen by it. The next thing that needs doing, Margaret repeated slowly. Then she straightened. We should prepare in case the fire comes this way. Fill every bucket and trough we have. Wet down the roof. Move anything flammable away from the house. Good. Let's do it. They worked as the sun set and the smoke grew thicker until Eliza's throat burned and her eyes streamed. The boys hauled water from the well. The girls soaked blankets and draped them over the porch railings. Eliza climbed onto the roof with a bucket and sloshed water across the shingles until they were dark and dripping. From up there, she could see the glow on the horizon, orange and red, pulsing like a living thing. It looked closer than 5 miles, looked close enough to worry about. She climbed down and found Margaret waiting. If it gets too close, the girl said, we go to the root cellar, right? Right. And we take the photograph from Pa's room and Mama's recipe box and Margaret. Eliza gripped her shoulders. It's not going to come to that. But if it does, we save ourselves. Everything else is just things. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I can't lose this place too. I can't. You won't, I promise. It was a promise she had no business making, but Margaret needed to hear it, needed something to hold on to. So Eliza said it with all the conviction she could muster and hoped she wasn't lying. They gathered the children in the kitchen as full dark fell. The smoke was thick enough now that Eliza could taste it, could feel it settling in her lungs. She made them sit at the table and eat bread and cheese. No one had appetite for more, while she watched the eastern horizon through the window. The glow was definitely closer. Tell us a story, Ben said suddenly. Please? A story. Eliza turned to look at him. Mama always told us stories when we were scared, about brave people who did hard things. The other children were looking at her with the same hopeful expression. Even Margaret, though she was trying to hide it. Eliza sat down at the table. All right, what kind of story do you want? A true one, Lily said. About you. About me? About when you were brave. Eliza thought about that. About the moments in her life that had required courage. There were plenty to choose from, leaving Philadelphia with nothing but a letter and hope, standing in a cemetery and deciding to keep living after Thomas died, coming to this ranch and refusing to accept the slow death of grief she'd found here. I'll tell you about my mother, she said finally. She was the bravest person I ever knew. She told them about growing up in a small Pennsylvania town, about her father dying when she was young and her mother raising 3 children alone, about the year the crops failed and there was no money, and her mother had walked 10 miles to town every day to take in laundry, washing other people's clothes until her hands were raw and bleeding, just to keep food on the table. She never complained, Eliza said. Never gave up. She just kept working, kept moving forward, even when things looked impossible. And you know what she used to tell me? What? Lily asked. She said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway. Fear is just a feeling. It can't stop you unless you let it. The children were quiet, absorbing this. Then Daniel spoke up. Is that why you're not scared now? Of the fire? Oh, I'm scared, Eliza admitted. Terrified, actually. But being scared doesn't change what we need to do, which is stay calm and stay ready. What if Pa doesn't come back? Ben asked in a very small voice. He'll come back. But what if he doesn't? Eliza reached across the table and took Ben's hand. Then we'll be sad, and we'll grieve, and then we'll keep going, because that's what brave people do. But I don't think that's going to happen. Your father is stubborn and strong and not about to let a fire keep him from coming home to you." She hoped that was true, prayed it was true, even though she'd lost faith in prayer mattering much. They sat together in the kitchen as the night deepened and the glow on the horizon grew brighter. Eliza kept the children talking, kept them distracted, but part of her was always listening for hoofbeats, always watching that window, always wondering if she was about to have to grab 6 children and run for the root cellar. It was past midnight when they finally heard it, riders approaching, multiple horses, voices calling out. Eliza was on her feet and out the door before the children could follow, the shotgun still in her hand, though she didn't remember picking it up. Caleb rode into the yard at the head of a group of men, all of them black with soot and ash, their faces streaked with sweat. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, stumbling slightly, and Eliza rushed forward without thinking. "Are you hurt?" "Fine, I'm fine." His voice was hoarse from smoke. "The fire?" "Turn north about 2 miles out. Wind shifted. Patterson's place is gone, but we managed to save most of the stock." He swayed, and Eliza grabbed his arm to steady him. "You need water, food, rest." "The men, I'll take care of them. You need to see your children. They've been terrified." As if summoned by her words, 6 figures appeared in the doorway, backlit by lamplight. Caleb stood there for a long moment, just looking at them. Then Ben broke ranks and ran, throwing himself at his father with enough force to make Caleb grunt. "Pa, you're back! You're back!" The other children followed, even Margaret, all of them clustering around Caleb like they were afraid he might disappear if they didn't hold on tight enough. He stood there in the center of them, his arms coming up to embrace as many as he could reach, his eyes closed, his face twisted with something that looked like pain and relief all mixed together. Eliza turned away, giving them privacy, and went to deal with the other men. She brought out water, bread, cold meat, whatever she could find to feed smoke-exhausted riders. They ate standing up, too tired to sit, thanking her in voices as hoarse as Caleb's. When they finally rode off, she went back inside to find the children had surrounded Caleb at the kitchen table. He was drinking water like he'd crossed a desert, his face still smudged with ash. The children were all talking at once, asking questions, touching his arms and shoulders like they needed the physical proof that he was real and whole. "All right," Eliza said gently. "Your father needs rest, and so do all of you. Upstairs. Now." For once, they didn't argue. They filed out one by one, each stopping to hug Caleb again before they went. Margaret was last, lingering in the doorway. "I'm glad you're home, Pa," she said quietly. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Then it was just the 2 of them in the smoke-stained kitchen. Caleb slumped in his chair, his eyes closed, looking more exhausted than Eliza had ever seen anyone look. "When's the last time you slept?" she asked. "Don't remember." "Come on." She pulled him to his feet, ignoring his weak protest. "You're going to bed. I need to check the stock. The stock will keep until morning. You won't." She half led, half dragged him upstairs to his room. He sat on the edge of the bed like a puppet with cut strings, and Eliza knelt to pull off his boots. They were caked with mud and ash, the leather scorched in places. "You could have died out there," she said, not looking at him. "But I didn't." "You could have. Eliza, those children almost lost you tonight. Do you understand that? Do you understand what that would have done to them?" "I was doing my job, protecting the land, protecting the community. And who protects them if you're gone?" She looked up at him and was startled to find tears on her cheeks. When had she started crying? "Who takes care of them? Who—" "You would," he said quietly. "You'd take care of them. I know you would. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that they need their father, not some hired cook who showed up 3 weeks ago. You. They need you. And if you died out there fighting that fire, they'd lose the last person they have left who remembers their mother, who knew her, who can tell them stories about her and keep her alive in their hearts. You can't just throw your life away for a piece of land." Caleb stared at her, his eyes red-rimmed from smoke and something else. "I wasn't throwing my life away. I was trying to save people's homes. I know, but you scared me. You scared all of us, and I—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat. You what? She stood up abruptly, putting distance between them. Nothing. I'm tired. We're both tired. Get some sleep. She was at the door when his voice stopped her. Eliza, thank you for keeping them safe, for being here. She didn't trust herself to speak, just nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her. In her own room, she sat on the bed and let herself shake. Let herself feel the fear she'd been holding back all evening, the terror of watching that smoke get closer and knowing that Caleb was out there somewhere in the heart of it. Let herself acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding for days now. She cared about him more than she should, more than was wise, and that was dangerous. The next morning, she woke to find half the children in her room. Lily and Ruth were curled up at the foot of her bed, fast asleep. Ben was on the floor, wrapped in a quilt. They'd been too frightened to sleep alone, she realized, too afraid of losing someone else. She dressed quietly and went downstairs to find Caleb already up, standing at the stove making coffee. He looked terrible. His face was still smudged with ash, his eyes bloodshot, his hand shaking slightly as he poured water. You should be resting, Eliza said. Couldn't sleep. Nightmares? He nodded, kept seeing the fire, kept thinking about what would have happened if the wind hadn't shifted, if it had come this way. But it didn't. This time. He turned to face her. There'll be another fire, another storm, another disaster. That's how it works out here. Nature keeps throwing things at you until something finally breaks. Then you rebuild. That's how it works too. Sarah used to say that. His voice was soft. Every time something went wrong, she'd say, "We'll rebuild." Like it was that simple. Maybe it is. Maybe we just make it complicated. He studied her for a long moment. Who are you, Eliza Rowan? What do you mean? I mean, you show up here out of nowhere, and in 3 weeks, you've turned everything upside down. You don't back down. You don't let me hide. You push and push until I don't know which way is up anymore. So who are you, really? Eliza poured herself coffee just to have something to do with her hands. I'm someone who lost everything and decided she wasn't going to lose anything else without a fight. I'm someone who knows what it's like to give up and knows what it costs. I'm someone who sees a family hurting and can't just stand by and watch them suffer when there's something I can do about it. You can't fix grief. No, but I can make sure it doesn't kill you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Last night, Caleb said slowly, when I was out there, watching that fire burn, all I could think about was getting home. Not to the ranch, not to the land. Home to them, to my children, and to... He stopped. To what? To you. I wanted to get home to you. Eliza's breath caught. Caleb, I know it's too soon. I know I'm a mess, and I don't have any business feeling anything for anyone when I can barely keep my own head above water. But I need you to know that you matter. Not just what you do for the children, but you. The way you stand up to me. The way you won't let me quit. The way you make this house feel like it might be a home again someday. She didn't know what to say. Didn't trust herself to speak. I'm not asking for anything, he continued. I just needed to say it. Needed you to know that you're not just hired help. You're more than that. Eliza set down her coffee cup before she dropped it. Her hands were shaking. This is a bad idea, she said. I know. You're grieving. You're vulnerable. You don't know what you feel. Maybe, but it doesn't make it less real. Caleb, we can't. She struggled to find the words. I came here to work, to help, not to complicate things. I know. I'm sorry. Forget I said anything. But she couldn't forget, wouldn't forget, because the truth was she felt it too, had felt it building for weeks now, this dangerous pull toward a man who was broken and stubborn, and so afraid of losing anyone else that he'd rather push everyone away than risk his heart. I'm not Sarah, she said quietly. I know that. I can't replace her. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? He moved closer, and Eliza's heart started hammering in her chest. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat of him, could smell smoke and ash and something underneath that was purely him. I'm asking if maybe, someday, when I'm less of a disaster, there might be room for something new. Not a replacement, not a substitute, just something different, something real. Eliza wanted to say yes, wanted to close the distance between them and let herself have this, let herself feel something other than grief and determination and the bone-deep tiredness that came from always being strong. But she couldn't, not yet, not when everything was so fragile and uncertain. "Ask me again," she said, "when the smoke clears, when you're sure, when you know it's not just fear talking. And if it's still real then we'll see." It wasn't a promise, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was somewhere in between, in that uncertain space where hope lived alongside doubt. Caleb nodded slowly. "All right, when the smoke clears." Footsteps on the stairs made them step apart, putting careful distance between them. Margaret appeared, followed by the younger children, all of them rubbing sleep from their eyes and looking rumpled and anxious. "Is everything okay?" Margaret asked, her eyes darting between Eliza and her father like she sensed something had shifted. "Everything's fine," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Who's hungry for breakfast?" And just like that, the moment passed. They moved into the familiar routine of morning, cooking, eating, cleaning, but something had changed. Eliza could feel it in the air between her and Caleb, in the way his eyes followed her across the room, in the careful way they avoided touching even by accident. The smoke would clear eventually. The fire would burn itself out. The danger would pass. But what would be left when it did? What would they build in the ashes? Eliza didn't know. But for the first time since Thomas died, she found herself wanting to find out. The smoke did clear, but what came after was worse than fire. It started with whispers. Eliza heard them when she accompanied Margaret and the children to church the following Sunday, felt eyes tracking her as she walked up the steps. Women clustered in small groups, their voices dropping when she passed. Men tipped their hats, but their faces were carefully neutral, guarded. She told herself it didn't matter. Small towns always talked. A new woman in a widower's house. Of course there would be speculation. She'd expected it, had armor built up from years of weathering Philadelphia society's judgment after Thomas died and left her with nothing. But expecting gossip and experiencing it were different things. After the service, as the children scattered to talk with friends they hadn't seen in weeks, a woman approached. She was perhaps 50, well-dressed, with the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Rowan, isn't it? I'm Constance Whitmore. My husband owns the general store." "It's nice to meet you," Eliza said, though she could already sense where this was going. "How are you finding the Vance household? It must be quite a change from Philadelphia." "It's different, but I'm managing." "I'm sure you are." Mrs. Whitmore's smile sharpened. Though one does wonder about the propriety of the arrangement. A single woman, living under the same roof as a widower, no chaperone, no family oversight. Eliza felt her spine stiffen. "I'm employed as a housekeeper. There's nothing improper about it." "Of course not. I'm merely saying what others are thinking. You understand how it looks." "I understand that I was hired to do a job, and I'm doing it. What people choose to think beyond that is their concern, not mine." Mrs. Whitmore's eyebrows rose. "Well, I can see you have strong opinions on the matter. I only mention it out of concern for those poor children. They've suffered enough scandal without adding fuel to the fire." "What scandal?" "Their father's behavior, of course. Hiding away like a hermit, refusing to participate in community life, keeping those children isolated. It's been the talk of the town for months. And now bringing in an unmarried woman from the East? Well, people are bound to speculate." Eliza wanted to tell this woman exactly what she could do with her speculation, but Margaret was watching from across the churchyard, her face pale and anxious. Making a scene would only make things worse. "Thank you for your concern," Eliza said through clenched teeth. "If you'll excuse me." She walked away before Mrs. Whitmore could say anything else, but the damage was done. She could feel it now, the weight of all those eyes, all that judgment. And when she looked at the children, at Margaret's stricken face, at the way Lily had moved closer to Ruth like she needed protection, she realized they'd heard it too. Had been hearing it probably every Sunday they came to town without her. The ride home was quiet. Even Ben, who usually chattered nonstop, sat in subdued silence. Eliza drove the wagon while Margaret sat beside her, staring straight ahead, her jaw tight. "It's not true," Margaret said finally. "What Mrs. Whitmore said, you haven't done anything wrong." "I know." "Then why do they talk like that? Why do they make it sound dirty?" Eliza didn't have a good answer. Because people were cruel? Because judging others made them feel superior? Because a woman who didn't fit neatly into their expectations was always going to be suspect? "Some people," she said carefully, "are more interested in tearing others down than building them up. It says more about them than it does about us." "Mama used to say that too." Margaret's voice was thick. "She said gossip was for small minds with nothing better to do." "Your mother was a wise woman." "Mrs. Whitmore used to be her friend. They'd have tea together before. But after Mama died, she stopped coming around. Said it wasn't proper for Pa to have female visitors without a wife to receive them." Margaret's hands clenched in her lap. Like he'd suddenly become dangerous just because he was alone. Eliza felt a surge of anger so strong it made her hands shake on the reins. This was what Caleb had been protecting his children from. Not just grief, but this, the judgment, the gossip. The way the community that should have supported them had instead turned them into objects of speculation and pity. When they reached the ranch, Caleb was waiting in the yard. He took one look at Margaret's face, at Eliza's rigid posture, and his expression darkened. "What happened?" "Nothing," Margaret said quickly. "Just church." "Margaret," the girl's composure cracked. "They're talking about Eliza, about her living here. Mrs. Whitmore said it wasn't proper and people were speculating and—" She stopped, tears streaming down her face. "It's not fair. She hasn't done anything wrong. She's been good to us, and they're making it sound like something shameful." Caleb's jaw went tight. He looked at Eliza. "What did they say?" "It doesn't matter." "The hell it doesn't." "Caleb, it's just talk. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it. You work for me. That makes it my responsibility to—" "To what? Ride into town and defend my honor? That'll only make the gossip worse." Eliza climbed down from the wagon, her legs shaking with suppressed fury. "I knew this might happen when I took the job. I'm prepared to weather it." "Well, I'm not prepared to let you." "You don't get a say in this." "The hell I don't. This is my fault. I brought you here. I put you in this position." "No one put me anywhere. I chose to come. I chose to stay, and I'm choosing not to let a bunch of bored townspeople dictate how I live my life." They were standing close now, voices raised, both of them angry and frustrated, and neither quite sure what they were fighting about. The children had scattered, sensing an argument brewing. "You're going to lose your reputation over this," Caleb said. "I lost my reputation the day my husband died and left me penniless. What's left can't be damaged much worse." "Eliza, what do you want from me, Caleb? You want me to quit? Pack my bags and leave because people are talking? Because I won't do it. Those children need me, and I don't abandon people who need me." "I don't want you to leave," he said, and the rawness in his voice stopped her cold. "I just don't want you to suffer for being here." Too late. Suffering's part of the package when you care about people. The words hung between them. Caleb stared at her, and Eliza realized what she'd just admitted. That she cared. About him. About the children. About this broken family she'd somehow become part of. "I should check on dinner," she said abruptly, needing distance, needing space to think. But Caleb caught her arm. "Wait. What?" He hesitated, something warring in his expression. Then, "Come with me. There's something I want to show you." He led her away from the house, past the barn, out to a spot on the ridge where the land opened up into a view of the valley below. The ranch spread out beneath them, the house and outbuildings looking small against the vastness of the territory. In the distance, Eliza could see the smoke-scarred land where the fire had burned, black against the gold. "Sarah and I used to come up here," Caleb said quietly, "when we needed to think, to talk, to remember why we were doing this." "Doing what?" "Building a life, making a home, All of it. He was quiet for a moment. After she died, I couldn't come up here anymore. It hurt too much. But last night, I walked up here after everyone was asleep, and I realized something. What? It didn't hurt the same way. It still ached, but it was different, softer, maybe. Like the edges had worn down just enough that I could touch the memory without bleeding. He turned to look at her. That's because of you, because you've been pushing me to remember instead of forget, to feel instead of hide. I don't know if that's a good thing. It is. It's hard, but it's good. He took a breath. The town's going to talk. Mrs. Whitmore and her crowd. They're never going to accept you living here, not unless we give them a reason to. Eliza's heart started hammering. What are you saying? I'm saying we should get married. The world tilted. Eliza took a step back, her mind reeling. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Caleb, we barely know each other. We've lived under the same roof for a month. I've seen you angry and kind and stubborn and fierce. I've watched you handle my children with more grace than I've managed in 18 months. I know you take your coffee black, and you hum when you need bread, and you can't sleep when you're worried because I hear you pacing in your room at night. He moved closer. Maybe I don't know your favorite color or what you dreamed of being as a child, but I know the things that matter. I know you're strong enough to stand up to me. I know you care about my family. I know you don't run when things get hard. This is insane, is it? You said yourself you're not leaving. You're going to stay and weather the gossip and let them tear you apart rather than abandon the children. So why not make it official? Why not give them something real to talk about instead of speculation? Because marriage isn't a solution to gossip. No, but it's a solution to a lot of other problems. The children need a mother. You need security. I need... He stopped, his voice catching. I need you. Not just what you do, but you. And I hope, that maybe you need us too. Eliza turned away, her hands shaking. He was right about one thing. She wasn't leaving, couldn't leave, even with the gossip, even with the judgment. Somewhere in the past month, this family had worked its way under her skin, into her heart, and the thought of walking away made her chest ache. But marriage? To a man still grieving his wife? To a life of being second best? A substitute? A replacement for what he'd lost? I can't be her, she said quietly. I told you before. I'm not asking you to be. Then what are you asking for? A partnership, a real one. Not romance or grand gestures or pretending we're something we're not. Just two people who've both been broken, trying to build something new out of the pieces. He came to stand beside her, not touching, just close. I can't promise you love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I can promise you respect, honesty, a home, a family. And if that's enough, if you can live with enough instead of everything, then I'm asking you to marry me. It was the most unromantic proposal Eliza had ever heard. No pretty words, no declarations, no promises of happily ever after. Just brutal honesty about what he could and couldn't offer, and somehow that made it more tempting than any flowery speech would have been. I need time to think, she said. Take all the time you need. Caleb, we're talking about the rest of our lives. I know, but ask yourself this. If you could see 5 years from now, which version looks better? The one where you're still fighting gossip as a housekeeper with no real standing in this family, or the one where you're my wife with every legal right to be here and every reason to hold your head up in town? Eliza wanted to argue, wanted to point out all the reasons this was a terrible idea, but she couldn't, because he was right. The gossip would never stop as long as she was just the help. But as his wife? The town could think what they wanted, but they'd have no grounds to attack her. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I ask. They walked back to the house in silence, and Eliza spent the rest of the day in a fog, her mind spinning through possibilities and consequences. The children noticed something was off. Margaret kept shooting her worried looks, and even Ben asked if she was feeling sick. But she brushed off their concerns and focused on the familiar tasks of cooking and cleaning. That night, after everyone was asleep, she sat in her room and tried to think clearly, tried to separate what she wanted from what made sense, what was safe from what was reckless. She didn't love Caleb. Not yet. Maybe never. But she cared about him, about his children, about the life they were trying to build from the rubble of grief. And wasn't that worth something? Wasn't that a foundation to build on? Thomas had loved her. She'd never doubted that. But their marriage had been built on expectations and social pressure as much as affection. Her parents had approved, the match had made sense, and she'd been young enough to believe that was how it was supposed to work. They'd been happy enough, content. But had she ever felt this sense of purpose, this bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be? No. With Thomas, she'd been playing a role. The good wife, the proper lady, the woman who knew her place and kept it. Here, she was just herself, raw and stubborn and tired of pretending. And Caleb seemed to want her exactly as she was, flaws and all. Was that love? She didn't know. But maybe it was something better, something real. The next morning, she found Caleb in the barn before sunrise, already at work. He looked up when she entered, his expression carefully neutral. "I have conditions," she said without preamble, his hand stilled on the harness he was mending. "All right. First, the children come first. Always. Before you, before me, before anything else. They've been through enough. This can't hurt them." Agreed. "Second, I'm not Sarah. I'll never be Sarah. I'll do things my own way, and you can't compare me to her or expect me to fill her shoes." "I don't expect that." "Third, if this is going to work, we have to be honest with each other. No hiding, no running to the barn when things get hard. We talk, even when it's uncomfortable." "That's going to be harder for me than you." "I know, but it's non-negotiable." Caleb set down the harness and stood, crossing to where she waited. "Anything else?" Yes. If you ever decide this was a mistake, if you wake up one day and realize you can't do this, you tell me, straight out. No pretending, no suffering in silence. I'd rather have honesty that hurts than kindness that's a lie. Same goes for you. Agreed. They stood facing each other in the dim barn, the morning light just starting to filter through the gaps in the walls. It wasn't romantic, wasn't the stuff of storybooks. It was two practical people making a practical arrangement for practical reasons. And yet, when Caleb held out his hand and Eliza took it, she felt something shift, something tentative and fragile but unmistakably real. "When?" she asked. "Soon, before the gossip gets worse, before people can say we're doing this to hide something." "How soon?" "End of the week? We can go to the minister, keep it simple, just family." A week. She had a week to prepare to marry a man she barely knew, to become a mother to 6 children who weren't hers, to tie her life irrevocably to this ranch and this family. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm. "All right," she said, "end of the week." They told the children that evening, gathering them in the kitchen after supper. 6 pairs of eyes stared at them as Caleb cleared his throat. "Eliza and I have something to tell you," he said. "We're getting married. This Saturday." Silence. Complete, stunned silence. Then Ben launched himself at Eliza, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Does this mean you'll be our mama?" Eliza's throat tightened. "I'll be your stepmother. Not the same as your mama. No one could be. But I'll do my best to take care of you." "Will you leave after?" Lily asked, her voice small. "Leave?" "No, honey. Why would I leave?" "Because everyone leaves. Mama left. And sometimes when Pa hires help, they leave too." Eliza knelt down to Lily's level. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now. You're my family now. I don't leave family." Lily threw her arms around Eliza's neck and held on tight. Ruth joined them, then Ben again, until Eliza was surrounded by children, all of them holding on like they were afraid she might disappear if they let go. Over their heads she met Margaret's eyes. The girl stood apart, her expression unreadable. "Margaret?" Eliza said gently. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know." Margaret's voice was strained. "It's just fast. A month ago you weren't here, and now you're marrying Pa and becoming our mother, and—" She stopped, blinking hard. "What if it doesn't work?" What if you change your mind? I won't. How can you know that? Because I've had enough loss in my life to know what matters. And you, all of you, matter. More than gossip, more than comfort, more than anything. Eliza stood, gently extricating herself from the younger children. I know this is scary. I know it's a lot of change. But I'm not asking you to call me mama or forget your mother or pretend this is something it's not. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of this family, to help, to stay. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, but if you hurt Pa, if you hurt any of them, I'll make you regret it. The threat would have been more effective if Margaret's voice hadn't cracked halfway through, if her eyes hadn't been wet with tears. Eliza crossed to her and pulled her into a hug, and Margaret held on tight, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I won't hurt them, Eliza whispered. I promise. You better not, Margaret said fiercely, because we can't lose anyone else. We just can't. The week passed in a blur. Caleb rode into town and arranged things with the minister. A quiet ceremony, no fuss, just family. Eliza had nothing appropriate to wear, so Margaret pulled out a dress that had been Sarah's, a simple blue cotton that fit well enough with some quick alterations. Mama would want you to have it, Margaret said, her fingers gentle on the fabric. She always said something blue for weddings brought good luck. Eliza didn't believe in luck, but she accepted the dress anyway. Wearing Sarah's clothes to marry Sarah's husband felt strange, almost transgressive, but Margaret's face was so earnest that she couldn't refuse. Saturday arrived cold and clear, the sky that particular shade of Wyoming blue that seemed to go on forever. They rode into town as a family, Eliza in the wagon beside Caleb, the children piled in back, everyone dressed in their best. The minister met them at the small church, his expression carefully neutral. He'd heard the gossip too, Eliza could tell, but at least he kept his thoughts to himself. The ceremony was brief. Caleb's responses were quiet, steady. Eliza's voice only shook once, when she promised to honor and cherish a man she was still figuring out how to know. And then the minister was pronouncing them husband and wife, and Caleb was kissing her, chaste, brief, more duty than passion, and the children were cheering, and it was done. She was married. Again. To a widower with 6 children and a heart full of ghosts. They had a quiet supper at the ranch that night, and the children went to bed early, exhausted from the day's events. Eliza stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, trying not to think about what came next. The question that had been hovering unspoken all week. Where would she sleep? Caleb appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Your room or mine? He asked quietly. Eliza's hands stilled in the dishwater. They hadn't discussed this, hadn't talked about expectations or arrangements or what kind of marriage this would actually be. I don't know, she admitted. We're married now. People can expect whatever they want. What do you want? He was quiet for a long moment. I want to do this right. I want to give you the time and space to get used to this. To me. But I also don't want to start this marriage with lies. And separate rooms would be a lie people would notice. So we share a room but nothing else? For now, if that's all right with you. It was more consideration than she'd expected, more than many men would offer. Eliza dried her hands and turned to face him. All right, your room then. It's bigger. I'll sleep on the floor. Caleb, don't be ridiculous. We're adults. We can share a bed without... She stopped, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Without complications, he finished. All right, but if you're uncomfortable, I'll tell you. That's how this works now, remember? Honesty. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, Caleb giving her privacy to change while he checked on the children one last time. When she finally climbed under the covers, the bed felt enormous and strange. She'd shared a bed with Thomas for 5 years, but this was different. This was a man who was still in so many ways a stranger. Caleb returned and extinguished the lamp, and Eliza heard him settle on his side of the bed, careful to maintain distance. They lay in the dark, not touching, both wide awake. Eliza? His voice was soft. Yes? Thank you for doing this, for staying. Thank you for asking me. Silence settled again, but it was less awkward now, more companionable. "Caleb?" she said after a while. "Yeah? I think this might actually work." She felt him shift beside her. "Yeah, I think it might." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Inside, two people who'd been broken by loss lay side by side, not quite touching, not quite trusting, but choosing to try anyway. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was a beginning. The gossip got worse before it got better. Mrs. Whitmore made sure of that, spreading her poison through the town like wildfire through dry grass. Eliza heard it secondhand from Margaret, who'd overheard women talking at the general store. How convenient the marriage had been. How quickly it had happened. How a woman from the East had clearly set her cap for a vulnerable widower and his ranch. "They're saying you planned it from the start," Margaret reported, her voice tight with anger. "That you came here knowing Pa was weak and took advantage." Eliza kept kneading the bread dough, her hands working harder than necessary. "And what do you think?" "I think they're idiots." "Margaret, I'm serious. They don't know anything. They weren't here. They didn't see how broken we all were, how Pa could barely look at us without remembering Mama. They didn't see you show up and just start fixing things. Not because you wanted something, but because it needed doing." Margaret's voice cracked. "You married Pa to protect us, to give us legitimacy, to stop them from tearing us apart with their talk. And now they're making you the villain anyway. People believe what they want to believe. That's not fair." "No, but it's true." Eliza shaped the dough into loaves and set them aside to rise. "The thing about gossip, Margaret, is that it only has power if you give it power. They can talk all they want. It doesn't change what's real. But real had its own complications. Living with Caleb as his wife was strange in ways Eliza hadn't anticipated. They were polite to each other, careful, like two people sharing space in a too-small room. He'd kept his word about giving her time. They shared a bed, but nothing more, both of them clinging to their respective edges of the mattress like the middle was a chasm they couldn't cross. During the day, they functioned. Eliza ran the house, Caleb ran the ranch. They ate meals together with the children, discussed practical matters, divided responsibilities like business partners. It worked well enough, efficiently. But there was no warmth in it, no connection beyond courtesy and shared purpose. 3 weeks into the marriage, Eliza was hanging laundry when she heard raised voices from the barn. She recognized Caleb's rough baritone and another voice, younger, angrier, Daniel. She dropped the sheet she'd been pinning and hurried across the yard. "Treating me like a child," Daniel was shouting. "I'm 12 years old. I can handle more than feeding chickens." "You'll handle what I tell you to handle," Caleb shot back. "You're not ready for breaking horses. You were breaking horses at my age, Granddad told me." "That was different." "How? How was it different?" Eliza reached the barn door in time to see Caleb's face go hard and closed. "It just was. Now get back to your chores. This isn't fair. Life isn't fair. You'll learn that soon enough." Daniel's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked much younger than 12. Then he turned and ran past Eliza without seeing her, his shoulders shaking. Caleb stood alone in the barn, his hands clenched into fists, staring at nothing. "That went well?" Eliza said quietly. He spun around. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough. What was that about?" "Nothing. Just a disagreement about chores." "That wasn't about chores. That was about you being afraid." His eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? You won't let him break horses because you're terrified something will happen to him. Same reason you won't let Ruth help with the cattle or Matthew climb to the hayloft after he hurt his wrist. You're so scared of losing them that you're smothering them. I'm protecting them. You're caging them. There's a difference." Caleb took a step toward her, and Eliza saw the fury in his face. "You've been here 2 months. 2 months! You don't get to tell me how to raise my children. They're my children too now. That's what marriage means. Marriage on paper doesn't make you their mother." The words hit like a slap. Eliza felt something twist in her chest, sharp and painful. "You're right," she said quietly. "It doesn't, but I'm trying, which is more than I can say for you." "What's that supposed to mean?" It means you're still hiding, still running. You show up for meals and you sleep in the same bed, but you're not here. Not really. You're going through the motions, checking boxes, doing what's expected, but you're not letting anyone in. That wasn't part of the deal. No? Then what was the deal, Caleb? A housekeeper with a ring? Someone to cook and clean and raise your children while you keep yourself locked away where nothing can hurt you? That's not what I... He stopped, his jaw working. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. That's what you promised. Honesty, even when it's hard. You want honesty? Fine. I'm terrified. Every single day I'm terrified. That Daniel will fall breaking a horse and break his neck. That Ruth will get kicked by a cow. That Lily will wander off and get lost. That Ben will... His voice broke. That I'll lose them the way I lost Sarah. That I'll wake up one morning and one of them will be gone and it'll be my fault for not protecting them well enough. So you protect them by pushing them away? By keeping them so close they can't breathe? At least they'll be alive to resent me for it. The words echoed in the barn. Caleb turned away, his shoulders heaving. Eliza moved closer, her anger draining away. Caleb, look at me. He didn't turn. Please. Slowly, reluctantly, he faced her. His eyes were wet. Sarah's death wasn't your fault, Eliza said gently. You couldn't have stopped the fever. You couldn't have saved her. I wasn't here. I was out checking stock when she needed me most. And if you'd been here, would that have changed anything? I don't know, maybe. I could have, what, willed the fever away, bargained with death? You're not that powerful, Caleb. None of us are. We can't control when people leave us. We can only control what we do with the time we have. I know that. His voice was hoarse, but knowing doesn't make it easier. No, it doesn't. But keeping your children in a cage doesn't make it easier either. It just means they'll resent you for the time they have left. Caleb sank down onto a hay bale, his head in his hands. I don't know how to do this. How to let them grow up without being terrified every second. You learn. Same way I'm learning to be their stepmother, one day at a time, one decision at a time. Eliza sat beside him. Daniel wants to break horses because it makes him feel capable, strong, like his father. If you keep saying no, you're not protecting him. You're telling him you don't trust him. And trust is what holds families together when everything else falls apart. What if something happens to him? Then we'll deal with it together, but you can't stop living because you're afraid of dying. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Caleb said quietly, I'm sorry for what I said before, about you not being their mother. You weren't wrong. Yes, I was. You've been more of a mother to them these past 2 months than I've been a father in the last 18. You show up, you engage, you let them be messy and loud and real. I've been so busy trying to keep everything controlled that I forgot what it means to actually live with them. So stop forgetting, start remembering. I don't know if I can. Then let me help you. That's what partners do. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. I've been a terrible husband, haven't I? You've been distant. That's a kind way of saying terrible. I knew what I was signing up for. A partnership, you said, not a love story. Maybe it could be both. Eliza's breath caught. What? I'm not good at this. At feelings, at letting people in. Sarah used to say I had the emotional range of a fence post. His mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. But I'm trying, and I think maybe I want more than just a partnership. Caleb, I'm not asking for anything. I'm just saying, if there's a chance, if you might ever want... He stopped, frustrated. I'm making a mess of this. No, you're being honest, which is exactly what we promised. So what do you think? Is there a chance? Eliza thought about the past 2 months, about watching Caleb slowly emerge from his shell, about the way he looked at his children now with something other than fear, about the small moments, a hand on her back as he passed, a quiet thank you, a rare smile that made her heart stutter. I think, she said carefully, that we're building something. What it becomes depends on what we put into it. That's not a no. It's not a yes either. It's a maybe, a possibility. I can work with maybe. Before Eliza could respond, footsteps sounded outside. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Pa, Eliza, you need to come quick. They ran. The whole way to the house, Margaret explained in gasps. Lily had climbed the old oak tree out front, the one with the rope swing, and gotten stuck. She'd gone too high, panicked, and now she was frozen 20 feet up, crying and unable to move. By the time they reached the yard, Daniel and Matthew were already at the base of the tree, calling up to their sister. Ruth had Ben by the hand, keeping him back, and high above, clinging to a branch that looked entirely too thin, was Lily. "Don't move, sweetheart," Caleb shouted. "Stay right there. I can't. Pa, I can't." "You're doing fine. Just hold on." Eliza assessed the situation quickly. The branches were spaced too far apart for Lily to climb down safely on her own. Someone would need to go up and help her, someone light enough not to break the branches, strong enough to carry her weight. "I'll go," Daniel said. "No," Caleb started. "Pa, I can do this. I climb this tree all the time." "Daniel." "He's right," Eliza said quietly. "He knows the tree. He's light, and Lily trusts him." Caleb looked like he was being torn in half, every instinct screaming at him to keep Daniel safe, to handle it himself, to control the situation. But Eliza could see the war in his eyes, the old fear battling against what he'd just learned, what they'd just talked about. Trust. "All right," he said, and the word came out strangled. "But you're careful. You hear me? Slow and steady." Daniel's face lit up. "I will, I promise." They watched as he climbed, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. Up past the swing, up through branches that groaned but held. When he reached Lily, he wrapped one arm around the trunk and extended the other to his sister. "Come on, Lily. I've got you." "I'm scared." "I know, but you trust me, right?" A pause. Then, in a small voice, "Yes." "Then take my hand." Lily reached out, and Daniel caught her hand, pulling her close. Together, they started down, Daniel talking to her the whole time, keeping her calm. The branches swayed, and Eliza's heart was in her throat, but they kept moving, kept descending. When they were low enough, Caleb reached up and lifted Lily down, crushing her to his chest. She was crying, but safe. Whole. Daniel dropped down beside them, and Caleb grabbed him too, pulling both children into a fierce embrace. "Don't ever do that again," he said roughly. "Either of you." "Sorry, Pa," Lily sobbed. "I'm not mad. Just don't." He released them and looked at Daniel. "You did good, son. Really good." The pride in Daniel's face was worth everything. That night, after the children were in bed and the adrenaline had faded, Eliza found Caleb on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, staring out at the darkened yard. She sat beside him without speaking. "I almost stopped him," Caleb said after a while. "Almost said no. Almost climbed up there myself. But you didn't. Because you reminded me. About trust. About letting them grow." He turned to look at her. "You were right. About all of it. I've been so afraid of losing them that I forgot they need to live. Fear's a hard thing to fight." "Yeah, but maybe I don't have to fight it alone." Eliza felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "No, you don't." Caleb reached over and took her hand. It was the first time he'd initiated touch beyond what was necessary, and Eliza felt the significance of it. "I want to try," he said quietly. "To be a real husband, a real partner. Not just in name. That's going to take work. I know, but you're worth working for. I'm bossy. I noticed. And stubborn. Definitely noticed that. And I won't put up with you hiding in the barn when things get hard. I'm counting on it." He squeezed her hand. "Eliza, I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise I won't mess up or retreat or struggle with Sarah's memory. But I can promise I'll try. And if you're willing to be patient with me, I am. You didn't let me finish. I don't need you to. I'm willing. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He pulled her closer, and she let herself lean against him, her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, listening to the night sounds, feeling the warmth of each other. "This isn't how I thought my life would turn out," Eliza said eventually. "Good different or bad different?" "Different, different. But I think maybe it's right. Maybe this is where I was supposed to end up." "Married to a stubborn rancher with 6 kids and a barn full of ghosts?" "Something like that." Caleb laughed, and the sound was so unexpected, so genuine, that Eliza lifted her head to stare at him. He was smiling, really smiling, and it transformed his face. "What?" he asked. "I've never heard you laugh before." "Haven't had much reason to." "Well, we should fix that." "Yeah, we should." He kissed her then, and this time it wasn't duty or obligation. It was tentative and careful and real. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "We should probably go inside," Eliza said. "Probably." But neither of them moved. The scandal broke 3 days later, but not the way Eliza expected. Mrs. Whitmore showed up at the ranch unannounced, climbing down from her buggy with the air of someone on a moral crusade. Eliza was in the garden when she arrived, dirt under her fingernails, hair escaping from its pins. "Mrs. Vance," the woman said, managing to make the title sound like an insult. "I need to speak with you and your husband." "About what?" "About propriety, about the example you're setting for these children, about what's being said in town." Eliza straightened up, trowel in hand. "If you have something to say, Mrs. Whitmore, say it here. I'm busy." The woman's face went red. "Very well. The town council has decided that your situation is unacceptable. A woman of questionable character living in sin. We're married. After being alone together for a month, the damage was already done, and now you're corrupting these children with your Eastern ways, your loose morals. That's enough." Caleb's voice cut through Mrs. Whitmore's tirade like a knife. He strode across the yard, his face dark with fury, and positioned himself between the woman and Eliza. "You will not come to my home and insult my wife," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Vance, I'm only saying what everyone is thinking." "I don't care what everyone is thinking. Eliza is my wife. She's the mother of my children. And she has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your entire gossiping, small-minded body." Mrs. Whitmore gasped. "How dare you? How dare you? How dare you come here with your judgments and your counsel and your moral superiority when you didn't lift a finger to help us after Sarah died? When you stopped visiting, stopped bringing food, stopped acting like a friend because it was inconvenient or uncomfortable? Eliza showed up and did what none of you would do. She stayed. She helped. She cared. And if that makes her questionable in your eyes, then I want nothing to do with your standards. The town can think what it wants. We're not leaving. We're not apologizing. We're not changing anything to make you comfortable. This is our home, our family, our life, and you're not welcome here anymore." Mrs. Whitmore looked like she'd been slapped. "You'll regret this, Caleb Vance. You'll be outcasts. No one will trade with you. No one will help you." "Then we'll help ourselves. We've been doing it this long." Caleb crossed his arms. "Get off my property." The woman sputtered, looking between Caleb and Eliza like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she huffed, gathered her skirts, and marched back to her buggy. As she drove away, kicking up dust, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did." Caleb turned to her. "I should have done it weeks ago. Should have stood up for you from the start, instead of letting them think they could say whatever they wanted. You were trying to avoid making it worse. I was being a coward, letting you take the hits while I hid behind practicality." He moved closer. "But I'm done hiding. From the town, from my grief, from this, from us." "Us?" "Yeah, us." He took her hand, dirty and all. "I love you, Eliza. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night when you made cinnamon rolls, maybe when you charged into the barn and told me I was failing my children, maybe when you agreed to marry me even though I was offering you nothing but obligation. But it happened, and I'm tired of pretending it didn't." Eliza felt tears spring to her eyes. "Caleb, you don't have to say it back. I know it's fast, I know you might not feel the same. I love you too, you stubborn, impossible man." He blinked. "You do?" "Yes, I do. And I'm furious with you for making me wait this long to hear you say it." Caleb laughed, that wonderful, rare sound, and pulled her into his arms, kissing her right there in the garden, both of them covered in dirt and not caring at all. The children, who'd been watching from the house windows, erupted in cheers. The town did exactly what Mrs. Whitmore had threatened. They closed ranks, made shopping difficult, whispered when the family came to church. But Caleb had been right. They helped themselves. They had the ranch, the land, each other. And slowly, a few other families started to push back against the judgment. The Patterson family, whose ranch the fire had destroyed, came by with eggs and a warm thank you for Caleb's help fighting the blaze. A young couple new to the area stopped by and asked Caleb's advice on horse breeding and stayed for supper. The gossip faded, the way gossip always does when people refuse to be ashamed. Margaret softened, letting Eliza in past the armor she'd built. Ruth started asking Eliza to braid her hair, and Lily took to following her around the kitchen, learning recipes. Daniel broke his first horse with Caleb's supervision and Eliza's prayers. Matthew's wrist healed. Ben lost another tooth and put it under his pillow, then whispered to Eliza that he knew she was the one leaving pennies, not the tooth fairy, but he appreciated it anyway. And Caleb learned to stay, to sit at the table after meals and talk, to read to the children at night, to hold Eliza's hand on the porch and talk about the future instead of mourning the past. One evening, 6 months after the wedding, Eliza found Margaret in Sarah's old sewing room, looking at the photograph that used to sit on Caleb's dresser. "I moved it in here," Margaret said quietly. "I hope that's okay. I thought maybe Pa needed the space to move forward. That was thoughtful of you. Do you think Mama would be angry about you and Pa?" Eliza considered the question carefully. "I think your mama loved your father and wanted him to be happy. And I think she loved you all enough to want you to have someone who'd take care of you. So no, I don't think she'd be angry." "Do you think she'd like you?" "I hope so. I like to think we'd have been friends." Margaret nodded slowly. Then she said, "I'm glad you stayed. I know I didn't make it easy at first, but I'm glad." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." That night, lying in bed with Caleb's arm around her, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From Philadelphia to Wyoming, from widow to wife, from hired help to mother. It hadn't been easy, hadn't been smooth, but it had been real. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his voice sleepy. "About how broken things can heal, if you give them time and care and refuse to give up on them." "Are we talking about things or people?" "Both." He pulled her closer. "I was so broken when you got here. Didn't even realize how much until you started putting the pieces back together. You did most of the work yourself. I just held up a mirror. You did more than that. You gave me a reason to try." "The children were always reason enough." "Yes, but you reminded me that I could be more than just their caretaker, that I could be their father again, that I could be alive again." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You saved us, Eliza." "We saved each other. That's how it works." Outside, a coyote called to the moon. Inside, two people who'd both been broken by loss held each other and chose, every day, to keep building something new. It wasn't the life Eliza had planned, wasn't the story she'd expected to live, but lying there in the darkness, listening to Caleb's breathing even out into sleep, hearing the house creak and settle around them, feeling the weight of 6 children sleeping safely under the same roof, she realized it was the life she wanted. Not perfect, not easy, but real and messy and absolutely undeniably hers. She'd come to a house without a heart and given it one. Or maybe the heart had always been there, just buried under grief and fear and the weight of loss. Maybe all she'd done was help them remember how to use it. In the end, that's what love was. Not replacing what was lost, but building something new with what remained. Not forgetting the past, but refusing to let it destroy the future. Not being perfect, but showing up anyway. Staying anyway. Choosing, every single day, to try. Eliza closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow she'd wake up in this bed, in this house, with this family, that there would be meals to cook and children to raise and a ranch to run and a stubborn man to love, that she'd found her home, not in a place, but in the people who'd chosen to let her stay.